Welcome to the 2020 Buckeye Book Fair. Thank you for joining us for this series of virtual events with Ohio authors and illustrators. The Buckeye Book Fair provides an annual celebration of literacy through author visits, educational programs for K through 12 students, and events for people of all ages. All of the books featured today and throughout the entire Buckeye Book Fair are available for purchase at buckeyebookfair.org. Should you have any questions for the presenters, please click on the Q&A button and type them in the window that appears, and they'll be answered later in the session. Sharon Draper is, among other things, a National Teacher of the Year and Coletti Scott King Award winner. Her new novel, Blended, tells the story of Isabella, an 11-year-old piano prodigy whose black father and white mother struggle to share custody, and Draper explores how an adolescent deals with social and family turmoil. Margaret Peterson Haddix is a Columbus resident and has worked as a newspaper copy editor, reporter, community college instructor, and a freelance writer. In The Deceivers, the second book in her Greystone Secrets series, the kids from the first novel continue their quest to rescue their mothers, and to do so must return to an alternate dimension where truth is illegal. Shelley Pearsall is the author of 6 books for middle grade and teen readers, and prior to becoming a full-time author, she was a teacher in the public schools, as well as working in the education departments of several parks and history museums. Her latest novel, Things Seen from Above, is an uplifting story of friendship, kindness, and new ways of seeing. Terri Libenson is an award-winning cartoonist and author from Cleveland. Told in alternating past and present chapters, her latest book, Becoming Brianna, is a heartwarming story unfolding over the 8 months that shy Bree prepares for her bat mitzvah. And now let's go to our moderator for this session, Margaret Peterson Haddix.
Okay, let me try that again. I am so sorry. I swear I clicked the unmute, but it didn't work. And I was just reeling into things and not noticing that it hadn't worked. So I'm glad there was that little note to me, unmute now. Welcome everybody to this panel. And I'm very honored to be able to moderate this discussion with Sharon and Shelley and Terri. And I thought because this is the Buckeye Book Fair, I would start with a question related to Ohio. I was talking recently with my sister about Sharon Draper's book, Blended, and we were discussing some of the serious elements in the book, but then we also discussed some of the lighthearted things about it. And one of the things that we both really appreciated was the importance of Grater's ice cream and the fact that that connected to us as Ohioans. And so I thought I would ask all of my fellow panelists, what Ohio traits or quirks or customs have you enjoyed putting in either this most recent book or any of your books? Or is there something about Ohio that you are longing to put into one of your books in the future? And you keep thinking, someday I will get that in there. So whoever would like to jump on that question first, go ahead.
I'll jump in.
Okay.
I always put Ohio things, and young people ask me, where does that take place? And why did you choose Montgomery Road in Cincinnati? I said, because I know what stores are located on Montgomery Road. So I can have a fictional activity happen at a barbecue place on Montgomery Road. So I use Fountain Square, I use Eden Park, I use local things that are there that kids that live in the area recognize it. But it doesn't matter if you live in Arkansas, you know that there is a place called Eden Park, which is probably cool for my description. So it's good for the people who live here to see it, but it also kind of expands the area for people who don't live here. And Grater's Ice Cream owes me money because I plugged them so well in that book.
You really made me want ice cream, I have to say.
I should get a free ice cream cone at least.
Yeah. Terri, oh.
I could jump in. Yeah, I'm craving ice cream too now. So I have a fictional town called Lakefront, and it's sort of a play on Lake Erie, Lakeview Cemetery here in Cleveland, Lakewood, Ohio. A lot of lake names. But it's definitely a nod to this area of Cleveland by the lake, and I always refer to the cold climate and how one of my characters absolutely hates it, but still loves it at the same time, and that's kind of about it. But whenever I write my stories, I always think of it in the Midwest and in Ohio, and it's just always in my mind.
Shelley?
I would just add, I've set all of my books in the Midwest too, and just kind of pull details from various Midwestern places, although the newest book is in Michigan. So I'm probably a traitor for saying that. I've always wanted to put casseroles in a book. I wanted to put, because that was such a big part of growing up in the Cleveland area. You always took your casserole to whatever event, and I've never been able to weave casseroles into a book yet. And I grew up in Parma, where we were also known for pink flamingo lawn ornaments. And so I've always wanted to add that detail somewhere, and it's never fit yet. But those are two that I have waiting to put somewhere in some book.
That's funny. That's funny. You're making me think we should have a potluck. After this pandemic is over,
yeah.
We're all going to come to a potluck with our casseroles, whatever the odd thing that has been handed down through our families is.
It has to have cornflakes on it.
Right?
It has to have cornflakes on it. Cornflakes on the top of the casserole.
Or fried onions. The Durkee's fried onion. That's really good too. Yeah. But for me, I realized that I guess I'm obsessed with street names, that those are the things that I put in the most commonly. The high school that my kids went to is on a street called Hard Road, which I was so amused by. And I would joke about, yeah, well, of course, this course is difficult. You're going to school on Hard Road. And there's actually 2 high schools on that road in the Columbus area. And so I put that in one of my books. There's also a street called Seldom Seen, where they just built a bunch of houses. And so it's like commonly seen. And I put that in a book once, and my editor marked it like, this is ridiculous. And I'm like, this is built on reality. And I could feel him rolling his eyes, even though it was only electronic communication, but I still left that in there. So it's kind of a fun Ohio thing. My next question is a little bit more serious. It struck me as I read Blended, Things Seen from Above, Becoming Brianna, and then knowing what my own book was about, it struck me that in 3 out of these 4 books, the theme of kids coping with divorced parents is a major part of the story. I'm not sure if that's a reflection of all of us writing the books at a time when our country is very divided. Maybe we're reflecting on all of that. I don't know what that means, but reading Blended and Becoming Brianna back to back, I wanted to match up Izzy and Brianna and let them commiserate with each other and talk about what it is like having parents who are divorced, really don't get along, and are not coping well with having to co-parent. And in both cases, Izzy and Brianna are really doing better with that than their parents are doing. And so I just wondered, this question is specifically for Terri and Sharon, if those characters did meet, what advice would they have for each other? Or, what do you think they would talk about, or what would they say? So I'll let Terri go first this time.
Oh, actually, this is the question that stumped me, because weirdly, I don't come from a family of divorce or blended families. But I use them in my books all the time, and I don't know why. I think I just want to represent as many kids as I can, and of course, I've known other kids growing up, or my kids have friends who come from extended families like that. So I just think it's a very universal thing. And the funny thing is in Brianna, her parents actually get along great normally, but it's the bat mitzvah that makes, as I call it, batzillas out of everybody. And it extends to the parents. And this is actually one of the few times where they don't get along. And it's definitely making Brianna get caught in the middle. So as far as her advice to Izzy, I'm not sure she has any advice. Maybe Izzy has better advice for Brianna.
Okay.
The two of them would be friends. It's, there's a line in there that Izzy says, I go to mom's house and I go to dad's house. She loves her mom, she loves her dad, but I never go home. And she has to tell her friends, well, this week I'm going to be at mom's house, and this week I'm going to be at dad's house. But she never feels like she's at home. And I saw so many kids, and I have kids in my own family, who live like this. And they have no power, they have no control, they can't go to court on their own. I'm 12, I want to say something about this. You have to be 14 or 16 or 18 before you can decide. Some adult decides their life and decides what they have to do with their life. And back in the days when we used to be able to go to schools, I noticed the kids with the mom backpack and the dad backpack. So many of them had the double backpacks, and they just dealt with it. And I wanted to give them some voice.
Wow. Yeah, that's
yeah,
great.
It's funny. I actually have an illustration of Brianna's backpack that I put in, that she kind of rolls back and forth in between her parents' houses. Luckily, they only live a block away. I made it a little easier on her, but it's kind of interesting because that was actually in the back of my head when I was writing the book, and because I really had to put myself in her place. Like, how does that feel to be going back and forth all the time like that? So that's interesting to me.
Well, and I like the detail in your book, Sharon. This is sticking out to me, very vivid in my mind, that the backpacks very much reflected what the mom and the dad's house were like, and
Yes.
Kind of what they valued. That was a very nice detail in the midst of that. That was
Thank
great. So my next question is even more serious, and one of those that I think that we could talk about for hours, but we don't have that much time. It's about doors and windows, using the analogy of the brilliant Rudine Sims Bishop, that reading all of your books, there's something in each of them that I think would be very compelling for kids within certain groups. That I can imagine Jewish kids reading Becoming Brianna, just being thrilled to see her dealing with everything that goes into a bat mitzvah, and figuring out her faith from a Jewish perspective. And then I'm sure kids whose parents are different races are really happy to see themselves in Izzy. And then in Shelley's book, she has Joey, who is a kid who sees the world very differently than everybody else around him. And kids who also see their world very differently than everybody around him, and are maybe bullied for it, as Joey is at certain points, they would really value seeing Joey portrayed in that book. But I'm sure all of your books also appeal to kids who can't relate to any of those characters because of those factors. And I think it probably would make them much more empathetic to read your books. And this is something I struggle with as a writer. I'm questioning how you appeal to both audience, both the ones who can relate to your characters really easily and the ones for whom it's not, an automatic relationship. So I'll start with Shelley. This is the hardest question, so I'll throw it to you first.
All right. Yes, it's a tough question. I jotted down some notes and how to think about this. I guess, to be honest, when I go into a book, I don't think as much about what I want to. I try to I guess portray complex characters. So I never kind of divide my characters into, these are the characters that readers are going to hate, and these are the characters they're going to love, and they're going to divide themselves into those camps. I feel like, most kids have a mix of those characteristics, or maybe can be pushed to lean one way or the other, or nudged. And so I feel like the books that I write are more of a nudge to maybe, maybe you are, maybe you are somebody who has bullying tendencies, but maybe this book nudges you in a different direction, or maybe you're somebody that needs to see the perspective of those bullies at times, to kind of understand maybe where they're coming from. And so it nudges you to think what's their life story that's brought them to this point to act this way. So I try to, I guess, get kids on both sides of the spectrum to think about the other side of the spectrum. And I try not to, I'm not a black and white writer. I try not to divide people and characters into those black and white camps. I always see that there's room for a big gray area in the middle. And I try to get kids to see themselves that way. I have to say, it was really tough writing about Joey. He's a kid that is a neurotypical thinker, and he sees the world from an above perspective. I do not. You talk about having to write from a perspective that isn't your own. I mean, I literally can't manipulate things in my head to see, when you have to see a box from different angles, I can't do that in my mind, but Joey can. And so literally in writing this book, I had to get a ladder and climb up on the ladder to try to see the world in the visual spatial way that Joey sees it, because I don't have those visual spatial skills. So, I think too, as a writer, sometimes you have to really immerse yourself into a viewpoint that you may not, or a perspective that you may not have.
I think that what's cool about Becoming Brianna is that that is the kind of book that I would have read when I was 12 or 13, because I loved learning about things that were not a part of my world. Like, oh, wow, that's so cool. Oh, I never heard of that. Actually, my best friend growing up was a Jewish girl. And I did get to go to a bar mitzvah once. And it was, I learned so much. And she and I are still friends. We were best friends since third grade. And so, but I would read this book as I'm learning something about somebody that's not exactly like me, but has the same problems as me. Brianna worries, she has fears. All girls worry about what they look like, what's going to happen, what is my mother going to do, what is my father going to do, how am I going to interact with my friends? Everybody has that, and it doesn't matter whether you're Jewish or anything else. So I loved the book because it opened up a world that for kids that they could see and say, oh, that's cool. I learned something by reading that book. And I really like that kid, Brianna. So I think it captured exactly what kids that age needed to do. Never, ever try to teach them. People ask me all the time, what are you trying to teach people through your books? Nothing. Whatever they got out of it is what I had intended for them to get. That's it.
Wow, I am honored. Thank you, Sharon. and might I say, my teenagers love your books. Thank you. Well, you just said it for me, but I will say with writing Brianna that I had a lot of experience, sort of, treading between the mirror and the window because of a comic strip that I wrote for about 14 years because the family in the comic strip is Jewish. And I wanted it to be, part of who they are, but not necessarily what the entire comic strip was about. So like, instead of when Christmas time rolled around, the family would celebrate Hanukkah instead, that kind of thing. So it was a little more on the secular side, but it definitely touched on that. And that gave me a lot of experience for sort of, like not shouting in people's faces, like, this is what you need to know about a bat mitzvah. So it's more like, but it's kind of hard to do it without preaching, I think. So I was very conscientious of that when writing the book. So, but thank you.
That's great. Well, I had the experience that I did not grow up in an area where I knew anybody who was Jewish. I didn't meet anybody who was Jewish until I went to college. And I felt like I knew so much from the books that I had read as a kid that it was like, oh yeah, I understand that, you know, this isn't something that I'm going to struggle with because I've read all these books. So, you know, that we all need to make connections, and it's nice that we have books to have that as a way to do that. My next question, let's see, is another thing that all of the books have in common is that we show kids being creative in different fields, and that's important symbolically and very much so to the plot of the story. That in my book, well, The Strangers, and then also its sequel, The Deceivers, it's code breaking and math that the kids are very interested in. It's music in Blended, art and Things Seen from Above. And then for Brianna, I think I could make the case that it's writing, because what she ends up writing for her speech is a major part of the book. I'll be the first to admit that Emma's code breaking skills in the Greystone Secret series far surpass mine, but I was curious for all of you about kind of your background, Shelley and Sharon, what your experiences are with art and music. And then Terri, obviously you both write and illustrate. So I'm curious for you, which of those things came first? And maybe I'll have you answer that first, Terri, and then go to the other two.
Sure. So with me, art definitely came first, illustration, I should say. I was an illustration major in college. I was pretty much told from the time I was born, you will be an artist, because it's pretty much all I did, and that was the expectation. So I was pleasantly surprised to find that I enjoyed the writing aspect of cartooning just as much as the illustration aspect, and actually maybe even more so at times. It's become very freeing for me as of late, and I don't know why, but I think as I've been doing more and more writing throughout my career, it's just become more and more a part of me. So and illustration is fun, but it's not as challenging anymore for me. I feel like that's sort of my downtime when I can just let go of my brain and and listen to a podcast while I do art. It's a wonderful balance between the two. So yeah.
Very cool.
Well, I can play the piano, and well, I take that back. I used to be able to play really, really well. I took lessons from the time I was 7 all the way up until, I don't know, high school, when I finally told my mother I had to stop. But so Isabella's love of music and her skill on the piano, it brought back so many memories, and it helped me remember why I loved music so much and how much I learned about music and musicians and history without trying to make it preachy to kids, because I wanted them to see, okay, this is her particular skill, this is her particular talent, but that is not necessarily who defines her. That's just what gives her life meaning. And because she's living in 2 different worlds, she has a great big baby grand piano at her father's house, because her father is rich, lives in Indian Hills. And at her mother's, she has a portable Casio that she practices on. Both of them provide the skills that she needs. 2 different methods. I'm sure the music sounds different on each one, but I gave her that so that kids could see there's a variety of ways to achieve a goal, to achieve what you need, and to achieve your dreams. And I think it's real important that kids discover something they can do that's artistic or musical, or something that is outside of the box that we put school in.
That's very cool.
I completely second what Sharon just said. I think creativity is so important. Whatever way you create, whatever, whether it's music or art or dance or however you can let out that. I mean, I believe everybody has a creative spirit, a creative side, and I just think it's is so important, especially in these times. I mean, I think that's your savior, is your creativity. And I've been excited, I have to say, by how many things I've seen kids creating now that they have the time. I mean, there's been a lot of disadvantages to COVID, but there have been some advantages in that I think it has forced some of that boredom, which then forces that creativity to, begin to, bubble up. So, but in terms of, I think it's 3 or 4 of my books have an art connection, and there is a reason for that. I guess I'm a closet artist. I have the opposite experience of Terri. I loved art as a young child, but I had two direct experiences that I can remember, where I was told that was not an achievable dream. One in middle school and one in college. And both of those experiences really turned me away from thinking about this as, thinking about art as a career. So it shows you kind of the power of how, one voice can turn you toward, a dream or a way. So I never considered it as a profession, but it's always been something that I've done on my own and kind of my just something I enjoy. So I think that like early love of art, that's why it makes its way into the books that I've written. I can't, as I said earlier, see the world the way Joey does from that visual perspective, but painting and ceramics and all of that have been something I've done, that kind of work I've done for years. And just, and again, kind of during this COVID time, that for me has made me go back to my art roots. I haven't been able to write as much as I've been able to paint and create. So, so yeah, yay for art as a tool.
Kind of as a follow-up question, you had people who discouraged you from art, but but you said, okay, I'm going to be a writer because that's a nice stable career.
Yeah, well, that's what's interesting. I mean, I think my family felt that, okay, you can go become an English major and you could use that anywhere. Mm-hmm. But if you become, in fact, one of them, the college professor, who'll never forget, said, well, if you're an artist, you're going to be poor. That's your only, all artists are poor and you'll end up painting in your garage. And so, those messages, I got more positive messages for being a writer than I did for being an artist. And I think that happens for kids too. You have an interest and it's, there's few key voices that push you one way or push you another way. So those are, there's always, I think, those turning points or those forks in a road in anyone's, career or interest. And those positive voices are so important for those teachers out there that are listening in what your students do someday.
My daughter is going into design, and I have to say, I am a proud parent.
Good for you.
Yeah, the messages you get make it.
But I think writing was probably a good idea.
I have actually had, well, in some cases friends, but in other cases kind of random people, adults who are parents, say to me, would you please talk my child out of majoring in creative writing?
I've definitely
and I was like, how could I of all people, how could I say to your child, give up on your dream? I'm not going to say that, but I do say, like have a backup plan too. I had a backup plan that I majored in journalism as well as creative writing. And so, it's like, figure out how you can work your dream out. And it sounds like that's what you did too, Shelley, that you were like, I can do something practical with this as well as enjoy it.
Right.
So shoot, I've got to talk to my daughter.
I always say too, there's no time limit on those dreams, so you don't become an artist in your 20s, maybe in your 50s,
Right. And that's the good thing about a lot of creative endeavors, that it's not like if you're not a successful gymnast by the time you're 25, you're not going to be a successful gymnast. But if you're not a successful writer by the time you're 25 or 30 or 50 or 70, that doesn't mean it's impossible. So those are good things to remember. Let's see, time-wise, I think I have time for another question before I go to the Q&A. In both Things Seen from Above for April and then also Brianna, they're dealing with friendship issues. And that's very common in books for this age group, because that's definitely something that becomes very important for kids and creates a lot of struggles for a lot of kids. So I was just wondering, if you don't mind revealing this, if the friendship struggles in those books are based on things that you experienced when you were that age. And how did you cope the age of 11, 12, 13, somewhere in through there. And Sharon, we'll pull you in too, even though Izzy's friends, I like her friend group. They seem pretty stable.
I'll jump in and say I had a lot of struggles with friends. I was a loner kid, but yet, everybody remembers you read these magazines that said, you should have 15 friends and, here's how to do. And I used to make little lists like, okay, you have to smile at 10 people and you have to, look up and make eye contact. So I would, the teen magazines, I'd take all their little advice and try to go to school and make friends with my little list of advice. And it's taken me a long time. I'm still not sure I've sort of gotten this at age 54, but, there are sometimes some people just like to be, on their own or have one or two close friends. And it took me a long time to accept that that's who I was. And to not, and to stop trying to be like, the articles I was reading in the magazines as I was growing up. And so I think that's why the friendship theme appears a lot in my books, because it was definitely something I struggled with as a kid and, and struggled with as an adult too. But I think it would be better if people accepted like who they were and their own value and their strengths and weren't trying to match up to some ideal that social media or in the past magazines used to hold up as the ideal.
I'm thinking 15 friends.
I don't know. I mean, you had to have a little social group. It was all about groups in the 80s. You had the group that you hung out with and went to the mall with, and it was, a different time.
There we go. Terri?
Oh, 15 friends sounds exhausting. I have a hard time just keeping up my, few close friendships. So I'm with you, Shelley. Oh my God. Kind of the same. It's I grew up. I was really, really shy growing up. I remember in 8th grade, I actually barely opened my mouth. It was bad. It was. Luckily, I kind of outgrew it in high school, but middle school was kind of rough. And honestly, I find it amazing I'm writing middle grade books because I blocked out so much in middle school. It's ridiculous. All I remember is it was such a transitional time with friendships. You felt like you were trying them on, taking them off. It's just, my friendships changed so often, so much. And that's where I base a lot of my stories from. My character, Emmy, from my first book, Invisible Emmy, she's definitely based off of me, shy, copes with things through being artistic and creative. That's sort of the way she expresses herself. And it's about her trying to find her voice, which took me a lot longer than it did her. And other instances of friendship dynamics I've drawn upon through either my own experiences or through my daughters. And my daughter's given me permission to say this, my older daughter. She's in college now. It's okay. She's completely over it. But when she was in 8th grade, she was actually dumped through a text message by her friend group. And it was really brutal. But it's also such a universal thing, especially nowadays, that I thought, I could completely base an entire book on this. And that's where my 3rd book, Just Jamie, came from. That's what she goes through. But I made sure to show it from the perspective of both the dumper and the dumpy, so that you kind of get both sides, because there's always 2 sides to a story. Those kind of dynamics, unfortunately and fortunately, there's so much of that. So there's enough material to draw on.
Yeah. Sharon, did you want to add anything?
Well, just that we're thinking about grade school. I met my 2 best friends in 3rd grade, and we are still friends today. Just those 2. I didn't have a whole lot, but those 2, we're still friends today. So
that's really cool.
Yeah.
That's really great.
Yeah.
So I'm going to the questions that have come in so far, and it's funny, they come in as anonymous attendee. So that's very mysterious. The first question that we have from the audience is, do you have any advice for aspiring writers / authors? So,
Yeah, I'll start.
okay, Sharon, go ahead.
Yes. Right. People always say, I want to be a writer. I said, well, quit talking to me and go write. And I tell them to observe, look at things. What does a tree look like? No, it's not just tall and brown. What does the stem of the tree, what does the trunk of the tree look like? What does the bottom of the tree look like? What do the branches look like? What do the leaves look like? Do they all look the same? Describe them. And so I take them through just looking outside the window and write what you see. If you can write really good descriptions so that the reader can see that tree and can recognize that tree, then you've got some place to start. Then you do the same thing with your characters. Who is this person? How tall? How short? How big? How little? Does the guy have a beard? Does he have teeth? Did his teeth fall out? If he doesn't have teeth, what happened to them? Did somebody punch him in the mouth so he lost his teeth? So there's a story behind everything and every object, every person in your story. So I tell young writers, I said, just take it slow, work on your descriptions, work on what they look like, what they sound like, what they felt like. If they walked into a room, I want to be able to recognize them because you described them so well. Use your 5 senses. What color was his beard? How stinky were his underarms? That one always gets the 8th grade kid. You know, I want to smell the funk of his underarms. And they go, ooh, and I said, but that's good writing because you've made it clear enough to where you have an emotional reaction. And so we take it through there. So if you get the 5 senses and you get the details of what you're talking about, then you can get into the actual plot in the story. But you can't write about a character unless you know who that character is and what that character looks like in detail.
Sharon, it's your voice I'm going to hear in my ear on Monday when I sit down to write. Because I struggle with descriptions and I'm going to hear, let's smell the underarm.
Want to hear the funk.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Shelley, would you like to go?
I would, that was all great. I would add, find yourself somebody to that you can share your writing with that you're comfortable with, whether that's a family member or a friend. It's always, as a writer, I think it's always helpful to imagine who's going to appreciate or who you can share your writing with. And so find that person or that little group of peers who want to read and share what you're creating and give you positive and informative feedback on it.
Okay. Terri, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, although both of those were fantastic. I'm smelling the underarm too. So it's so funny because what you were just talking about, Sharon, I think that is so valuable. But it's interesting because whenever I go through my editor, because mine is more of an illustrated novel, it's a hybrid. It's an illustrated novel and graphic novel. It's a combination. My editor is always saying, show, don't tell. And so it's almost like opposite advice, but I'm remembering your words for when I'd like to do an actual prose book, because that's a goal of mine someday. I think that's really valuable. I would also say a piece of advice I always give is, if you feel like you have writer's block, step back, put your work away for a while. Because I find, especially for myself, for both writing and artwork, it's so helpful to just not see it. If you have the luxury of some time, if you could put it away for like a day or two, or even for a few weeks, and then come back to your work, you see it with fresh eyes, and that has definitely been a lifesaver for me.
And go get ice cream.
Yeah, ice cream.
Go get ice cream.
They have all had wonderful advice. There's one more thing I would add to that as well, which is the more you read, the better you are as a writer. And I tell kids it's almost like cheating. It makes you so much better to read a lot. And so if you not just read, but pay attention to, wait, why is this thing that I'm reading so wonderful and so enjoyable and it feels so real? And why is this other thing that I'm reading like torture? And, if you kind of make those comparisons and think a lot about what you read, that helps as well. So, or just have fun reading and then you absorb it almost by osmosis. So that's good too. Another question is, how do you make major or minor decisions about the book? Do you base it on if it's good for the plot, or if you just want the plot to go that way, or is there a different factor you base the decisions on?
I would say my gut is what I make decisions on. If it's going the wrong direction, it's like I get a worse and worse stomach ache. It's just like or if for those of you that are musicians, it's like hearing a wrong note. And the note just gets more and more like ear shattering. And then I know this isn't the right choice here. And so it's just a matter of putting in things until you get it to sound, that musical and you're not hearing all those wrong notes. So I usually go on like how I feel and how it, kind of sounds in the imagination, if that makes sense.
It takes a multitude of refinements and changes to make it right. You might start with the red car and then you expand it into the speeding cinnamon colored car sped down the street. So it's an expansion, it's a building. It's like putting layers on. So you start with a red car and you end up with a cherry red Ferrari, which is very different from a red car. So it takes time and probably ice cream for inspiration.
I echo what you were saying, both of you were saying. I also rely a lot on my editor, honestly. I am so fortunate to have a wonderful editor who sort of brings whatever I guess I feel in my gut or in the back of my head that hasn't quite gotten to the forefront. She has a knack for bringing it out and seeing some of those details that I don't quite see yet. So like Shelley, you were saying, having someone else read your work, I think can be very valuable in that sense. So yeah.
I would agree with all of that. Sometimes I feel like, in addition to having an actual human editor, which is very important, sometimes I feel like my characters themselves are editing me. That and this is a great feeling when the characters become real to me, and I feel like they're standing behind me saying, I would never do that. Are you kidding? That's not what I would do. I would do this. And that's when I know, okay, I understand that character and I need to change what I've written, that I'm doing it wrong, or, I need a different character to be doing whatever that action is. So that's very helpful. I think we have time for one more question before we go to the next panel. And this one is, do you plan your writing out or just start writing? And do you know what your ending is when you start, or do you change a lot of the book?
I'll start.
Go ahead.
I just start writing and I have a plan, and it never, ever, ever follows that plan. I say, okay, I'm going to do this, and then she's going to do this, and then this is going to happen, and it never, ever happens that way. But it's always better than the way that I thought it was going to be, because that's what editing and refinement. Every day I go back and I look at chapter 1 and I fix it. And then I go back and I do chapter 1 and chapter 2, and then I fix it. So there's always changes, always refinements. It's never done the first time straight through. It just doesn't happen like that.
I always know the beginning and the end. Like I know sometimes what the last sentence is going to be, and I know how I want it to start, and then I usually do some planning for the middle. But I definitely don't start until I have the beginning and the end. I need to know the bookends of the story, and then fill in the middle.
I've done it every which way possible. can't tell you. My books have just been one giant weird experiment, but I think with my first book, I just wanted to see if I could do it. So I just started writing, and thankfully a story and a plot came along the way, and then a twist ending came later, which was like, thank you. And then I've tried it. I've done outlines. I do try and follow outlines, but then of course, like Sharon said, they tend to go awry half the time. And I've rewritten books many times. This one, the one I'm doing now, my 5th book in the series, has been written during the pandemic. And I know there was like a panel discussion about writing during the pandemic. And yeah, I fell into that too. I had to rewrite this book, I don't know, like 3 or 4 times. The plans always go awry, but somehow they work out. I don't know how. I think because you're pushed into a deadline, and then you're pushed into trying new things and trying this or trying that. And it really stretches your mind a lot. And you hate it at the time sometimes, but but it tends to work out in the end.
Yeah, I totally relate to that answer, because I think I have used every combination of having everything planned out and having it go that way to just kind of starting and seeing where it goes. And so I think of myself as a hybrid writer. That's it kind of depends on the book. No matter how many books you write, each one is a new book. So
I hate to interrupt this
I
fascinating
was just gonna
discussion.
say, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we'd like to thank everyone for participating in our Young Authors Showcase today. And right up next will be, there we go, our fantasy novel showcase. So please visit our website at buckeyebookfair.org to see our other events and to buy signed copies of the presenters' books. In the chat feature right now, if you look really quickly, there will also be links to the individual authors' websites. But thank you everyone for participating this afternoon.
I enjoyed this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.